Now, in this video, we are going to compare what the steps that you need for working with individual objects with the steps that you need to take to work with arrays of objects. You'll need to know this as we get into the labs and programs that use arrays that are coming up here in the next several weeks of the course. So we've been working with individual objects all throughout the semester. And so you hopefully are aware of and remembering that there are three steps, three things that you do to set up and work with arrays in a Java program. We declare the object, then we instantiate the object, and the instantiation uses the new keyword. And then once the object has been declared and instantiated, it exists in memory, and then we can call or use methods of the object that are defined for the class that the object comes from. So as an example, imagine that I have a puppy class that has certain properties and certain methods. Okay, let's see here. All right, so to declare the object, we would say private and then the name of the class it comes from and the name of the object. Okay, as long as we give a legal identifier name for the object name, we can choose anything we want. But then once we choose that, if we want to refer to that same object, we have to use that same name. Each object has a uniquely identifying name in our program that is determined by the declaration. Okay, then once the object has been declared, we instantiate the object by using the new keyword. And when you instantiate an object, this should be review, it's the name of the object equals new, and then the name of the class it comes from. And then inside parentheses is a comma-separated list of values that will be used to initialize the properties of the object. And those are the data types and the order in which you have to specify the values and how many of them there are defined in the class definition in the heading of the constructor method. Okay, so imagine my puppy class, the constructor wants three values: the name of the puppy and the breed and maybe the weight in pounds of the puppy. Okay, so that's why I'm specifying those three things there. Okay, so now that we've declared and instantiated the object, then later on in the program we can use methods of the object. So maybe there's a setter method called setWeight, and I pass in the value, the new value of weight, which would be my new dog.getWeight plus 5. So if my dog gained 5 pounds, okay, this would be a way to set the weight to 5 pounds more than the weight was. Okay, and so we have getters and setters and toStrings and all that kind of thing. All right, so that's we've worked with individual objects a lot. Okay, well now there is a drawback to working with individual objects, and that is if you have a lot of them and you want to perform the same operation on each of the objects, it's very repetitive. So we have to copy and paste and change the names, and it's really kind of a pain. So imagine that I had a kennel of 905 dogs, and they're each individually named: first dog, second dog, third dog, etc. Okay, if I wanted to call the add1toAge method for each of the dog objects, I need, if there are 905 of them, I need 905 separate calls to the add1toAge method for each of the individually named objects. So it doesn't scale well as the size of the data increases. So this is where arrays are going to help us, okay? Because what we'd like to be able to say is, hey program, I would like to call the add1toAge method for all of the dogs that I have. Without arrays, I can't do that. I have to do each individual object separately. Okay? So, the better approach is to use an array of objects. So, as you saw from your reading, an array is a group of objects that are all the same type, and they're stored together in memory. Okay. Now, so the array has a name, so I can talk about the entire group by just using the name of the array, and then I can specify each individual member of the group or the array with a second value, which we call the array index or the array subscript. And that is a number. Okay? Now, something that's important to know is that the first item in the array is not item number 1 or index number 1. It's index number 0. Okay? This is not to be confusing for students. It turns out that the index is an offset from the beginning of the array. So how many objects am I away from the beginning of the array? All right. So think about the fourth element in the array. How many objects away from the first one is it? It would be 3 away from the first one. And the very first one is 0 elements away from the first one because it is the first one. So that's because the array index is actually an offset from the beginning. It's kind of strange, but we are going to get used to numbering the items in the array starting with 0, not 1. Okay? And it turns out that the last item in the array, the index number for that is 1 less than how many elements we have in the array. So if I have an array of 100 things, if I start, the first one is number 0, the second one is number 1, and so on. So the last one, which would be the 100th one in this case, would have index number 99. So if you count from 0, 1, 2, up to 99, there are 100 numbers in that range. So just always get used to this off by 1 kind of thing. The first element in the array is number 0, and the last element is 1 less than the number of elements in the array. If I have 1,000 things, the last one is element 999. Okay, so if we have an array of objects, the contents of the array, each member of the array is itself an object that we have worked with before. So we can declare, we can instantiate, we can call methods. Okay, and the idea is it's just an object with a fancier name. Okay, so if we want to call a method for an element in an array, we need to use the name of the object. Well, the name, elements in arrays have a two-part name. Okay, so an object in an array is identified by two things. First of all, we give the name of the array. That gets us to the group of objects we're talking about. And then we have to specify the index number of the object in the array to get down to one object out of all the ones that are in the array. And the notation that's used to separate the name of the array and the index number is square brackets. We haven't used square brackets yet in our programming. So square brackets are reserved for specifying the index or the subscript of a particular array element that we want to process. So if we have an array of puppy objects, let's say it's called litter. The third object in the array, the name of the third object in the array would be this. It's a two-part name. First we give the name of the array litter, and then inside square brackets we give the subscript number or the index number, and the third one would be number 2, because the first one is number 0, second one is number 1 then, and the third one is number 2. Okay? So with that in mind, we can process elements of the array just like we can process regular objects, just that we have to give it these two parts to the name, the array name, and then inside square brackets, the offset or the index number. Okay? Well, you might say, what's so great about this? Well, what's great about this is the fact that the index number or the subscript is a numeric value, an integer value, and can be represented by a variable. Okay? So we can use a loop to change the value of the variable, and then every time through the loop we can be working with a different element of the array. So if I wanted to add 1 to age to all of the puppies in the litter, remember before I had 905 things? So if I have an array of 905 puppy objects, the first one is position 0, second one is 1, third one is 2, etc., and the last one is position 904. And so then I would have 905 puppies in my array. So I could do it this way. Now that you say, well, that's worse than the other way. But notice what happens is every statement is exactly the same except for this value inside the square brackets. And so if I would use a variable to represent that value, I could start the value of the array at 0, and I could have every time through the loop, the value goes up by 1, and I could keep going as long as the value is less than the number of elements in the array, as long as it's less than 905 in this case. So that's what's so great about using arrays, is we can combine them with loops, and instead of 905 statements to add 1 to all the elements of the litter, I can do that in a program with 3 lines. Okay? I have a for loop where I start the variable at 0, I have it go up by 1, and I keep going in the loop as long as x is strictly less than the number of elements in my array. Okay? And so inside the body of the loop, notice that the thing inside square brackets, the index number, is not an actual number, it's a variable. It's the control variable for this loop. So think about how this will work. The first time through here, x is 0, which is less than 905. So I execute, and litter x, when x is 0, it means I will add 1 to the age of the object in position 0 of the array. Then I say x plus plus, so x is now 1. Go back and test the condition again. 1 less than or equal to 905 is true. And so I execute the statement again. Same statement, but the value of x has changed. And so the second time through the loop, x is 1, and I add 1 to age for the element in position 1 of the litter array. And then x plus plus, it becomes 2. And then I would add 1 to this element in position 2, and then position 3, position 4, etc., 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 etc. Eventually, x would be 904, which is less than 905, and I would add 1 to the element in position 904 of the array. And then when I say x plus plus, x is now 905. 905 less than 905 is false, and I drop out of the loop. I exit the loop. So I have one statement that is calling add 1 to age for an object, and I execute that 905 times. Okay. Now, something very important to mention here is that the notation that we use with this dot is the same as it's always been. Okay. So what goes on the left and right-hand side of a dot when I call a method? The right-hand side is the method, and then inside parentheses, if there's any parameters, I would say that. Okay. What goes to the left of the dot? It's the name of the object that we want to have do this method. So notice to the left of the dot is the name of an object. It's just that this object is one element of the array, the litter array. And so I have to have a two-part name, the name of the array, and then inside square brackets is the subscript number or the index number of the object in the array that I want to operate on. So it's the same notation, object dot method. It's just that the object has a more complicated name. Now, it turns out that in general, if we would change the number of elements in the array, then we'd have to go in a previous example. If we would change the number of elements in the array, we'd have to go in and edit this 905. And maybe we have a bunch of these loops all through the program, and so it's a kind of a pain to do that. So it's a better, it is a better approach to specify the upper limit. The upper limit here for my for loop should always be, I can use this notation, the name of the array dot length. So the name of the array followed by length returns the number of elements in the array, and they're numbered from 0 to the name of the array dot length minus 1. Okay, so you're going to see this heading over and over again in our labs and our work. Okay. You want to have the control variable for the loop starting at 0, going up by 1, and keep going as long as you're strictly less than the length of the array. That will cause in this case x, the control variable for the loop, will take on all of the legal subscript values or index values for the array, from 0 up to the length of the array minus 1. And then what do you want to do for each of those things? we want to call a method for element X of the array. And then if X changes through all the legal subscripts, it'll process every element of the array the same way. Okay, so in our programs, we need to know how to set up arrays and then how to work with them. So remember how there were 3 steps to work with individual objects? Declare, instantiate, and use methods or call methods. There are 4 steps to working with arrays. First, you declare the array. Then there's 2 instantiations. The first instantiation is we're instantiating the array. And what this does, we specify the number of elements or the size of the array. We set it up with a specific number of elements. And then each of the elements in the array is null until we instantiate each one. So there's 2 instantiation steps. Then once each object in the array has been set up, then I can use methods of the objects in the array. Okay, so let's say I wanted to have an array of puppies called litter. To declare the array, it's the same basic notation, private, and then the class that the array is going to come from, and then the name of the array. But the difference is the class is going to be the class name followed by an empty set of square brackets. So that's how we declare an array of objects. The system knows if there's an empty set of square brackets after the class name, it's an array of those objects, not just a single object of that class. Okay, now once we've declared the array, to instantiate the array, we give the name of the array with no brackets, equals new, class it comes from, but then we have a square bracket here instead after the class name instead of a parenthesis. And inside the square brackets, we specify the number of elements that we want. Okay? So that doesn't create any objects in the array. It simply sets up, okay, I have an array and there are 905 slots in the array. And the system automatically knows that the smallest subscript is 0 and the largest one is 905 minus 1, or 904 in this case. Okay, now that the array has been set up, the individual elements still have not been created, and so I need to do something like this, where for every element in the array, I need to instantiate the puppy object. So notice the difference here is when puppy is followed by a parenthesis, it knows that I'm calling the constructor method for the puppy for one object. So I make a new puppy object, max pug 12, and store that in slot 0 of the litter array. Then I make another new puppy, Bon Poodle 15 pounds, and store that in slot 1. Sunshine's a Great Dane 120 pounds, stored in slot 2, etc. So I do that for all the elements. There are shortcuts for doing this, and we're going to see them later. Okay, but right now we're all set. So that's the three of the 4 steps, and then once I have instantiated every element of the array, then I can use methods of the objects with a loop. And this is where I get the power of arrays, is that here I can print the toString method for every element in the array by using this loop. Now I've used index here instead of x, so that's why I have index inside the square brackets. So I'm printing the toString method for the element in position index of the litter array, and system.println puts that in the Java console. Okay, and because index starts at 0, goes up by 1, and I keep going as long as I'm less than or equal to the length of the array, I'm going to do it for every element of the array. Okay, so that's a look at individual objects versus arrays of objects in Java.